Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for joining this month's podcast, or excuse me, this month's webinar from Construct2Lead. I thank everyone for joining us, especially given how busy things have been lately throughout the industry, basically. And hopefully we'll be able to give you some very useful information today regarding development across the United States. Of course, we're specifically looking at the 10 hottest states for new development. This is not to put any other state or area down. It's just that these 10 states kind of represent what's going on in the country right now. And you can kind of know that if you see a lot of action in one state, what's kind of going on, something similar is happening nearby. So anyways, as more people are joining in, I might pause for a second here and there to let people in. But for right now, I want to thank everyone for coming so far. And we still have some more people jumping in, but I'll start with the presentation here in a second. First of all, this month's presentation is called the 10 hottest states for new project planning. We're presenting it using our proprietary Construct2Lead data. So this is data you won't be able to get anywhere else, but it's our exact data that our research team has itself uncovered. So let's get started here. And then again, if there are a few times where I pause, it's because I'm letting more people into the meeting here. So first of all, let's start with what's going on so far. All of the data you're going to see in this presentation was pulled on June 20th, 2022. And to give you guys an idea of what's going on, we are actually comparing the data from that time period, from January 1st of this year to June 20th, to the same data that we recorded for the same time period last year. That gives you kind of an apples to apples comparison and allows us to know what's going on in an exact sense. So that we can track numbers exactly. And well, let's start with what's going on in this year so far. Despite some economic headwinds, the Construct2Lead research team has detected an overall 2022 year-to-date increase in under development new construction projects. So again, the stats I'm about to go over right now are not our total new projects in the system or anything like that. These are going to be the stats for projects that we've recorded, we've brought in since the beginning of the year, new planning projects basically. So in nearly every category, the number of new projects that have been entered during a time frame that begins on January 1st and goes to June 20th of this year is greater than what was recorded for that same period in 2021. This increase is likely caused by still unfilled demand for new residential and related projects. This increase is likely caused by a still unfilled demand for new residential and associated product units in states that are experiencing sharp population growth or there are existing housing shortages. So basically in 2022 so far, we've added, and this is again data from June 20th, up until June 20th, we've added 16,128 new projects. For that same time period, we had added 11,850 projects. So we're already about 5,000 projects ahead of where we were for this time last year. Last week was actually very busy. Last 2 weeks have been busy. So we're actually already over 17,000 projects for the year. New projects, and we're also seeing as well as more projects altogether, we're seeing an increase in projects between $25 and $100 million. So for last year at this time period, we had just under 2,400 projects in that time frame, that monetary frame. This year we have over 3,700 projects. This increase in project value is even more extreme when you look at projects over $100 million. So from the beginning of the year to June 20th of last year, we had 468 projects that were over $100 million. For the same time period this year, we have just under 900 projects over $100 million, or over $100 million. So that's doubled. And in fact, in the last couple of days, we've even added more. So we're probably getting closer to just under 1,000 projects over $100 million. So we have more projects altogether, and the value of the projects has gone up in since this time period for last year. So let's go back to immediately what we want to talk about, the top 10 states for this year. It's not unexpected that Texas is going to be the #1 state. It easily leads the pack in terms of new project planning, and there's a reason for this. Construction is very similar to the Electoral College, and that the larger a state's population is, the higher its growth rate is, and the more raw number of people that come in, you're going to have a disproportionate amount of planning. In the case of Texas and Florida, based on United States Census data, which we look at very closely in the research partner. In fact, we have a demographic-based research model where we're looking at the latest census data, the latest economic data for regions and regions within states. And we're trying to anticipate where new construction planning is going to be. And in this case of Texas and Florida, they're adding the equivalent of a small city every year, over 200,000 people every year. The side effect of that is you're going to have to develop the equivalent of a new city every year, whether it's in planning for down the road or current construction. And what we're seeing in Texas is last year we had a strong year. We had 3,059 projects by June 20th in 2021. This year we're already just under 4,800. I think even probably by now we've hit 5,000 since the last 10 days have transpired. Within that, we're seeing a large surge in retail and restaurant development. Of course, this chart here says combined retail and restaurant. That doesn't mean projects that are both retail and restaurant. It means a combination of our two stats for those fields. So we've jumped from 815 projects to 1,572. For manufacturing and warehouse, and now for Texas, that's going to be largely warehouse development. We've gone from 471 to 702. Keep in mind that Texas is what I call a crossroads states. It's on the border with Mexico, so you get a lot of product moving up from South America. You also have the major port areas around Galveston and Houston. So there's a massive, and of course you have several major airports. So there's a high demand for warehouses in Texas. Of course, Texas is getting a lot of residents. So our combined residential stats for this year have jumped up from 586 to 964 projects. And hotel has also doubled from 43 to 81 hotels. A lot of those hotels have been in major cities, but we're also seeing smaller flagged hotels in a lot of the collar counties that are developing. So overall, Texas was very strong last year, continues to be this strong this year. And so there really isn't a surprise there. We're gonna move on to our next state. Florida, the big surprise here with Florida is that California has traditionally been the #2 state for new construction development. This year, however, Florida has jumped ahead of California. There are a couple factors in here. The major one is just that more people are moving to Florida. Again, it's one of these states that gets a small city every year. Florida also did not have as many restrictions the last few years that might have hindered development. So the Sunshine State has consistently led the usual #2 state, California, throughout 2022. This has been true week in, week out. With a population of 22 million that is rapidly growing, this economic expansion is beginning to manifest as actually an increasing number of high-rise projects along available coastal areas. Most states like Texas, you have a great deal of surface area land that can be developed. Same thing with Utah and Arizona. So there isn't that force to develop a lot of high-rises. In Florida, however, the opposite's true. You're basically fighting for coastal land, so there's an impulse to build upward. That being said, we're also seeing a lot of residential communities being built in land that is reclamated from the interior of the state. So land that is mostly not arable or not inhabited now being transformed into arable land. The year-to-date total from last year has jumped up. So at June 20th of this year, last year, we're at 977 projects. This year we've jumped up to 1,400 since this data was acquired on, or was polled on June 20th. We've gone well over 1,500 projects. Retail and restaurant has not moved up that much and moved from 389 to 403. That's kind of expected since Florida didn't have many restrictions last year, so you wouldn't see this kind of surge in new restaurant and retail planning. Residential has jumped up, however. So we had 279 residential projects by this time last year. We were just under 600 when these numbers are polled. I'm sure it's over 600 by now. Manufacturing and warehouse has gone up from 160 to 211. And hotels, there's a modest increase from 67 to 79. So Florida very strong this year, consistently strong throughout the year. And I haven't seen anything to indicate those numbers are changing this year so far. The traditional #2 was always California, simply because it's the largest state by population. Although California, the Golden State's population of approximately 40 million, is beginning to level out due to out-of-state immigration, there is an existing severe housing shortage in that state. So we've all heard stories about, and people who are working on the front lines, of course, know then the major metropolitan areas of California, there's a huge housing shortage. There's a significant homeless problem, but there's also housing shortage for every economic tier. So even though people, according to the Census Bureau, are leaving California in some cases, you still have this backlog, this demand for new construction, for new residential construction. So now the industry is starting to catch up with that demand. So even though California has dropped from the number 2 to number 3 slot, it's still doing better than it was at this time last year, and there is a very strong demand for residential housing. In fact, California, the California the California Environmental Quality Act, it is very restrictive in terms of what can be developed in California. However, the state has waived many restrictions for new residential housing. So that's one of the things that's actually also helping to push California up. So from this time last year, it's gone up from just over 1,000 new projects to just under 1,300 new projects. And I'm sure in the last 10 days, it's gone over 1,300 projects. The combined retail and residential or restaurant hasn't moved that much up from 329 to 342. But of course, residential has moved up from 453 to 659. It's a pretty significant increase. Hotels have actually dropped slightly. We'll keep monitoring that to see if that's going to stay throughout the year. I have a feeling that might be a little bit of a bubble there. And manufacturing and warehouse has gone up a little bit. There's that kind of race to kind of catch up with the demand for warehouse space, especially in the areas around Long Beach and the major port areas. But again, even though California moved from 2 to number 3, there's still a lot of demand for new construction in California. The next state has become one of the solids that we see all the time, North Carolina. North Carolina is another one of these southern states that's getting a lot of new population. A lot of these southern states that traditionally had a lot of land because they were underpopulated. In the last few years, we've seen a lot of people moving there for a variety of reasons. Of course, this keeps up with the demographic trends we've seen since the 1970s. The Sunbelt states have gained people due to a baby boomer retirement, due to a lot of industry relocating down south for regulatory reasons. But there are also other factors involved as well. North Carolina, the Tar Heel state, has consistently been the number 4 state, both this year and last year. Basically, a lot of that work is in the Triad area, but we're also seeing more in every part of North Carolina. As many of you know, there was like a hotel freeze in Asheville for a while, just because it was a big hotel tourist area, and it was growing basically faster than the city planners could handle influx of tourists and residents. But that's been lifted recently, I believe. So we should even be seeing more work in North Carolina. North Carolina from this time last year moved up from 538 to 732 projects combined. When you look at restaurant and retail, it's a little bit down from last year, but I think that might just be a little bit of fluctuation based on the resources we've covered or contacts so far this year. Combined residential has jumped up from 281 to 397. Hotels, again, have gone up a little bit. And again, I expect to see a lot of university-related hotels in the Triad area. A lot of universities are building their own hotels. And of course, they have other countries' manager that are flagged under one of the major hotel chains. And then again, manufacturing and warehouse. North Carolina is one of those few states where most of your manufacturing and warehouse actually probably is manufacturing, just because they've made a major push for both high and low tech manufacturing in North Carolina. But the bottom line is North Carolina is consistently a number 4. Now, after number 4 here, it kind of gets interesting. As we get into, first of all, Canada obviously is not a state or part of the United States. It itself is divided into several provinces that are all searchable in the Constructly database. You can search by province, by city, just as you can in the United States. But for our statistical reasons, for our comparative reasons, within Constructly, within the research department, we treat it kind of like as a major state. And at this time last year, we were not covering Canada, but so far so good in Canada this year. It has a population about the same as California's, with a slightly higher growth rate. It was under very restrictive pandemic restrictions last year. So we're seeing a little bit of a slower recovery, but in the long run, I expect the same numbers in Canada that we see in California every year. So this year we have 732 new projects in Canada. We actually had a pretty significant number last year. Most of those, a pretty large percentage of those are going to be residential projects in California and Canada. A lot of them are concentrated in Ontario and British Columbia. We are trying to gain more projects in some of the provinces with fewer population numbers. And we think we'll have success once we develop more contacts up there. We're always on the phone. We're trying to work more contacts into our system. New York. Now here's the first surprise. And in fact, this has changed since I pulled the data last week. New York struggled all last year to get into the top 10, even though it's one of the largest states by population. Now, since the time that I covered, since I had these numbers written up, transferred into graphics, this has switched a little bit, and we'll get into that in a second. But New York took about 2 years to struggle to get into the top 10. It has begun to recover. Its population, overall population numbers have dropped below Florida's, but we're still seeing a lot of projects there. So we're up from 408 to 533 projects in New York as of 10 days ago. That's gone up a little bit in the last few days. Fortunately, there's been a little bit of recovery in retail and restaurant in New York. We know they were hit very hard, from 132 to 193. Combined residential, mostly in the form of high rises, is going up again. Last year it was really low for a state the size of New York at 211. It's gone up to 337. Manufacturing warehousing has been about the same, lower 60s to mid 60s. And hotel, there's a slight increase from 18 to 21. That seems like a low hotel number for a state like New York. But what we also saw last year into this year was a lot of conversion projects, hotels being converted into low-income housing or homeless housing. That was a major trend in New York City, as well as New York environs, and in California. So there isn't really an impetus to develop new hotels if the existing hotels are being converted into residential units. But here's the first little surprise that we have this year. Georgia, I have listed here as number 7. Since this data was compiled 10 days ago, Georgia has once again jumped into the number 6 spot. So, Florida and California have been competing all year for the number 2, with Florida staying ahead consistently. This year, Georgia and New York have been changing spots back and forth like a car race. Georgia, since I pulled this data, we've done very well in Georgia, and I think it's getting closer to 600 new projects. The Peach State only has a population of about 11 million. However, it's another one of these southern states that's just getting a lot of people. So North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas. Tennessee is not in our list, but it's also one of these states that has consistently been doing well around the Nashville area. So this year, when we pulled this data, we had 522 new projects in Georgia for the year. That's closer, like I said, to 600 now. The combined retail and restaurant has gone down a little bit from last year. I think that's a little bit of a bubble where it might have gone up since I pulled this data. Combined residential has jumped up noticeably from 127 to 230. Now, Georgia is a unique state in that a large percent of its residential projects are not multifamily like we see in most of these other states. A lot of them are large single-family subdivisions. That's also true of Texas. In New York, most of your residential we come across is going to be multifamily. Down in Georgia, they still have a lot of land to develop, so it's a lot of your single-family housing. In Tennessee, for instance, a lot of townhome development. Hotels is about the same as it was last year. Manufacturing and warehouse is up a little bit. Again, Georgia is what I call a crossroads state. It has major airport. It's also seen a lot of overland shipping from Florida and the other southern states going up to the northeast. It also has a major port. So as any kind of crossroads state, you're going to see a lot of warehouse development. There's a little bit of a glitch here in that our copy is the same for Georgia. Just ignore that. I can fill you in here. It's no big deal. Ohio is another one of these big crossroads states. Because any kind of shipping from east to west is going to go down that I-80 corridor. And so basically you have a ton of warehouse construction in Ohio. You also have multiple medium-sized metro areas. You have Cincinnati, which is actually doing very well economically. You have the area around, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton that has a lot of tech firms. Cleveland is maybe not as great as it was a couple decades ago, but it's still a major population area. And then, of course, you have the Toledo area and other medium-sized metro areas, Columbus and Ohio. So there's a slight increase from last year, 406 to 496. Of course, Ohio is a very complex and diverse economy, too. It's a mixture of a lot of different things. And it's a bellwether state, so it's always going to be a good state for development. Restaurants have gone up from 129 to 178. Residential is up a little bit from 129 to 178 as well. I think that might be a little bit of a tech error there, maybe. Manufacturing warehouse again is up this year, and hotels are up in Ohio. Finally, the next state I want to go over is another one of these states that's in a dogfight. Washington and Pennsylvania keep changing hands this year. And in fact, Pennsylvania is another one of these northeast states that's had a hard time staying in the top 10. Last year it was doing a little bit better than it was this year. But Washington State is one of these states that we kind of always rely on. If we're looking for projects or our team needs projects, we know we can find them up there because it's actually one of the few northern states that's getting a large population influx. This trends we've seen in the United States are the Southeast gains a lot of people. The Northwest is getting a lot of people. So Washington State and British Columbia and Canada are always going to be little hotspots for development. So the two corners of the continent are doing very well. Also, there's a lot of regulatory stuff in Washington that we can track. So I expect these numbers even to jump ahead as the year goes on. Washington State has experienced several years of strong population growth, having gained roughly 1 million residents between 2011 and 2021. That's pretty good for a northern state. And it usually ranks in the middle of the top 10 for new construction planning. It's off to a slower spot in 2022 than I expected. However, we kind of think that it's going to keep going up there. And with a population of only 8 million, it kind of is punching above its demographic weight for what we're seeing in these states. So if compared to last year, we've gone up from 386 to 446. We've gone up in terms of combined retail and restaurant from 62 to 75. And manufacturing and warehousing is down a little bit. I'm surprised by that because usually in the SeaTac area, there's a lot of warehouse development. So, but that might just be a temporary glitch. We'll see. Combined residential has gone up though again from 270 to 280. And that is a combination of multi-story projects in the Seattle area, as well as a lot of townhome construction for some of the collar counties. And hotels have gone up a little bit. I believe that hotels in Washington are going to kind of, as things settle back into normal, I believe that will keep going up again. And then let's go to the next state, the last state in our list, and I'll also cover some honorable mentions here, is Pennsylvania. So as I alluded to a minute ago, Pennsylvania and Washington are always changing position. Pennsylvania last year was closer to the middle of the top 10. But then again, you have two major metropolitan areas in Pennsylvania. Western Pennsylvania, the economy is largely based on fossil fuel extraction and mining. Maybe in the next few years as that opens up again, that can maybe kind of go back up. But for right now, it's stuck in the number 10 position, but it's still not doing bad. You still have 446 new projects as compared to 289 last year. It's gone up in retail and restaurant planning. Residential, it's nearly doubled. It's more than doubled from 122 to 271. And manufacturing and warehouse has gone up from 46 to 78. Of course, Pennsylvania is one of those states where you have a lot of formal U.S. naval facilities that are being converted either into, a lot of them are being converted into kind of mixed use residential areas, but there are a lot that are being converted into warehouse and shipping centers. A lot of them are the ones along the, I believe it's the Delaware River right there. And lots of course, former naval facilities around Philadelphia. This is also true for California and New York. We're seeing a lot of the old Navy yards being converted into either mixed-use residential and retail or office space, or they're being converted into these kind of large macro warehouse facilities. The hotel numbers for Pennsylvania are a little low so far this year. I do hope that will go up again. I'm going to go through some honorable mentions then. We've gone over the top 10. A state that I think we should make is an honorable mention would be Arizona, which is just was just outside of this top 10 criteria. It is of the Mountain West or Southwest states, depending on how you catalog it, the one that's seen the largest population boom in terms of raw numbers. And it's also getting a lot of migrants from California. They call it the Californization of Arizona. Also, I feel that Tennessee will gradually move up into the top 10 as the cheap land starts to get less and less available around collar counties in Nashville. Right now in Davidson County, there's still a lot of land to develop. So it's easy to develop single family housing, townhome housing. That is eventually gonna run out though. And you're gonna have to see more high rises that will push up the value of projects, which will increase the number of projects in our database. And of course, Nashville has been kind of like the entertainment center for the South or the lower Midwest, depending on how you classify it, for a long time now. So I kind of feel like Tennessee has a chance of breaking into the top 10 sometime soon. Other states, other areas that are worthy of being mentioned are, a lot of people have asked us about Utah. Utah, we have made efforts to get more projects into Utah lately. Utah has a very high population growth rate, but a low starting population. So even though it has a high population growth rate, you have fewer number of people going in. And right now, Utah and Idaho are kind of moving together in terms of where they are in in the rankings. They're in the lower 20s. I believe they're 24 each last time I checked. A lot of the Midwestern states are piled up in the teams. Illinois and Wisconsin tend to travel together, and Indiana and Michigan tend to travel together. And so even though they're all doing a little bit better than they were last year, none of them have been able to break into the top 10. Another state that I'm kind of looking to see if we can get more projects in is South Carolina. Just because we're doing very well in Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia, by default, you should think that South Carolina will gradually begin to push closer and closer to the top 10. I've already mentioned Washington State is the big hitter for the Northwest, and also British Columbia is a major area for development. Across the Northeast, we're seeing, Maine is still doing okay, and Massachusetts is doing okay, but most of those areas have lost population in the last few years. So basically, that's kind of like what we're looking at right now. Is the big states are Texas, Florida, California. You're looking at North Carolina, then is your number steady 4. Canada, if you treat it as one big state, is number 5. Then you have this kind of like dogfight. That's this combination of New York, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Washington State kind of near the bottom. And I kind of feel like some of those states at the bottom are going to change positions throughout the year, but the top 4 or 5 are going to be basically the same. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to talk to or contact Brett Moser. He's our sales manager. You can email him at brett.moser@constructalead.com with, of course, the hyphens in ConstructAlead. His office number is 855-874-1491. His mobile is 224-358-9203. And while we have people here, what I'm going to try to do is unmute everyone that I have muted. And let's see here. Well, I think some of you guys have to unmute yourselves at this point. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask us. I know there's one person who just joined us, and unfortunately he came in late. Fred Murga, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to go through this presentation again with you. If anyone has any other issues, I believe you have to unmute yourself, and you can go ahead and ask me any questions you'd like. I'll go back to the beginning of the presentation because one person did jump in late here, and unfortunately I missed them. So for right now, again, what we're seeing is this year we're seeing we've seen an increase of projects from this time last year, pretty significant one actually, since we just came in over 30,000 projects last year. When we were at just under 12,000 at the end of June, we're looking at closer to 35 to 40,000 projects this year, hopefully. Another thing that is important is that the value of projects has jumped up considerably. In terms of projects over 100 million, we've gone from 468 to 886. So across the board for the same time frame period last year, we've seen an increase. Texas, again, continues to lead our numbers as we expect. Of course, there's a magnifier here. Whenever you have a large population to begin with, high growth rate, and a lot of people moving in, it creates this magnifier effect where you see a lot of new construction. In the case of Texas and Florida, they're constructing the equivalent of a small city every year because they're getting well over 200,000 people every year. And of course, Texas is a crossroads state, so we see a lot of warehouse construction. Florida has supplanted California as the number 2 state for development. And California had that position for a long time. Florida has jumped from 977 projects for a time period that goes from January to June of last year, compared to January and June of this year, to just under 1,500 projects. In fact, I think we're over 1,500 now, based on probably the data from the last 10 days. Of that, there's been a substantial jump in new residential planning. California, we're also seeing, even though California fell from 2 to 3, California, we're also seeing a pretty significant jump in new projects. Of course, as I explained earlier, even though people are emigrating from California and its population is basically flat right now, there has been such a huge demand for new housing in California that we're just seeing a lot of that backfilled residential construction now moving forward in terms of planning. We're also seeing a lot of conversion of hotels to residential in California. North Carolina is a steady number 4. It has been for years. This year, its numbers are up as well. It's been the number 4 slot for a long time, but it's moved up again in terms of residential planning. And of course, it's also a major area for manufacturing and warehousing. and a major area for university planning as well in the Triad area. Canada isn't a state, obviously, but we approach it as one for our in-house reasons. We didn't have Canada at this time last year, but it's doing very strongly. It's, again, the population of California, but with a higher growth rate. They're coming off of restrictions, so we're hoping to see those numbers go up. New York, as I mentioned before, has been battling with Georgia all year for the sixth spot. Georgia in the last 10 days has moved ahead of New York again. But New York is still there, and it's doing better than it was last year, especially in residential planning. Georgia, the Peach State, has moved up from last year. Since last 10 days, it has moved ahead of New York. Restaurants and retail have gone down a little bit from last year, but residential has increased. I think Georgia will continue to do well this year. Ohio here, unfortunately, we accidentally repeated the same text for Georgia, so just ignore that. But the bottom line with Ohio is it's a major crossroads state. So we're seeing a lot of warehouse construction is always there. Right now, I think that number is going to go up as the year goes on. There's a little bit of a bump in residential construction for Ohio. Washington State is usually one of the really strong, it's actually the strongest area of the Northwest of the country. It's one of the northern states that's actually gaining population. It's gained a significant amount of people in the last 10 years. That population isn't just focused on Seattle, however. There's population growth throughout Seattle, a lot of warehouse and industrial growth in the SeaTac area. So Washington's a state to look for to kind of move up. And then finally, we're at Pennsylvania. It's dropped a little bit from last year, but it's still doing better than last year. So we kind of expect Pennsylvania to continue to do well this year, hopefully. And there has been a surge in residential planning. Right now, that's basically our webinar. You can contact Brett again if you have any other interest or any other questions. For the people who jumped in late that I didn't let in until the very end of the meeting, sorry I didn't see you. You're always free to call me or stay on this call or email me. My contact is jim.dinnerville@ConstructALead. It's the same as Brett's, but just with my name. Or you can pass on your questions to Brett, and then he'll answer them or pass them on to me. So I thank everyone for showing up at the meeting today. And I hope you guys have a great, unless there's any questions, I hope you have an enjoyable rest of the day then today. Please feel free to talk to the rest of us, and I will talk to you, anyone who has any questions later on. Thank you.